Thank you for being here at our second Chicago Cannabis Zoning Ordinance Information Session. This is the second of 3 consecutive sessions we're having throughout the city of Chicago. We see some familiar faces from yesterday where we started at Malcolm X College. We're very appreciative of Kennedy King College today for hosting us for this session. And we will have another tomorrow at Truman College up on the north side. We'll announce that at the end of the evening again. My name is Juan Carlos Linares. I will be moderating today, and I will explain further about the process. But before we go there, I do want to introduce to the microphone the chairman of the Zoning Committee for City Council, as well as 44th Ward Alderman, Alderman Tom Tunney.
Thank you, Juan. Good evening. Good evening, folks. I'm a North Side Alderman, but I'm a native South Side. So it's nice to be back in my old neighborhood. I actually live a little west of here, but we're glad to be here and glad to be in front of you. So this, as Juan Carlos said, this is an informational session. We'll go a little bit about the zoning, which is location, other aspects, meaning consumption, cafes, some other ideas. This is not going to be the primary focus of our meeting. This is a result of state legislation passed by Governor Pritzker in the House that goes into effect for practical purposes January 1 of 2020. And many of you know that there are medical recreational facilities in our city, and they, to some degree, will be automatically medical/recreational as of basically January 1. The selection process and locations is what is a lot of work that we're going to be doing with the ordinance that was introduced by Mayor Lightfoot, and we'll hopefully listen to community input as these meetings tonight are part of that, and hopefully get an ordinance in front of City Council in short order that we can somehow work closely with that January 1st, 2020 implementation. As I said, we are going to focus this conversation on Chicago's zoning regulations and the guidelines businesses have to go through to establish dispensaries in our neighborhood. As Juan Carlos said, I am the chairman of the City Council of Zoning, Landmarks, and Building Standards, of which the legislative process will go through our committee. And we're scheduled to talk about this on the 15th of this month, and hopefully we can get some agreement by our City Council members, and there will be a substitute, I believe, to the ordinance introduced by Mayor Lightfoot. And part of that substitution hopefully brings in ideas and comments that you all bring to the table and here tonight at Kennedy King. We'll have another meeting tomorrow night on the north side, and as I said earlier, the subject matter experts we have here from the city will be walking through a PowerPoint to instruct you of what I consider almost zoning 101. But in the end of the day, it's really about where these dispensaries can be located from a zoning perspective. So in this case, it's about location. And there's been some other ideas about expansion of uses and such. That is for later discussion. But we want to talk to you a little bit about zoning, where these can be allowed, where they can't be allowed, and then to walk through some of the state legislation that gives the city some home rule authority on where they can be placed, the number, different regions around the city, and hopefully our goal is, and the mayor's goal is to provide equity in all neighborhoods of the city of Chicago. And I know we're going to hear loud and clear, as we did last night at Malcolm X, about location, and how we as a Southside community can partake and can be part of the investment in this industry, and also protecting the health and safety of our communities also. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Juan Carlos, and we're going to get started. So again, thank you very much, and we look forward to your input. Okay. Great.
Thank you, Alderman. And I'm going to also introduce Paul Stewart, who is with the Mayor's Office and will be giving a presentation in just a moment, and Patrick Murphy, who's the Zoning Administrator with the Chicago Department of Planning and Development. So for now, I'll just take a few minutes, if I may, to talk about our rules of engagement today. So today is really an information session, as you're going to hear, but we want to hear your questions on this information. So just a couple of notes for tonight is, number one, when we get to that point, everyone's who has a question, and we'll ask that after the presentation, everyone who has a question, because we're only here from 6 to 7 p.m., that's our scheduled time, is going to have 1 minute to ask their question. We found yesterday that's sufficient time to get questions out. Most people don't take that full minute just to ask a question, but we do want to allot a minute so we can get as many people as we can. So to that point, we wish that everyone, and we hope that everyone will be respectful. So one of the tenets we use in our Office of Community Engagement in the Mayor's Office is that every voice has value. So we hope that everyone here with their questions are respectful of other people's as well. And we do, of course, appreciate and believe in our First Amendment right to speak. So if there are those of you who want to speak while someone else is speaking, we hope that you won't do so, because you're really just taking that time away from the person on the microphone. Secondly, be timely, please. So again, we have 1 minute allotted per person, so we hope you take, if you want to take that full minute, you absolutely can, but we hope that you are timely in your question. And lastly, and we saw this yesterday, we have no doubt this will be the case today, be courageous. Ask questions that, someone else might not ask. This is your time to be heard in terms of the process, the zoning process specifically. So be courageous, don't be shy to ask any questions, we are here to answer them. So the last thing I'll say then is there will be a time where we're done. So this is from 6 to 7. And if we did not get to your question, we still want to hear from you. So please note this, we will have this at the end of the session as well up on the slide. This is our community engagement at cityofchicago.org email that is checked on a regular basis. And what we'll do is we'll compile all of the emails we get from this at this address and respond to you to your question on the zoning process. So with that, I'm going to invite Mr. Paul Stewart to the microphone for the presentation.
Good evening. Thank you, Juan. I'd like to thank Chairman Tunney for allowing the Zoning Committee to host the meetings so that we can come out into the community and speak regarding the zoning ordinance that was introduced for the cannabis legalization that will take place on January 1st, 2020. So again, I thank you for the opportunity to present this evening. We thank you for being here and giving us the opportunity to be in this wonderful facility, Kennedy King, in this community. And I'm going to go through the presentation as timely as possible so we give as many of you opportunity as possible to ask questions and we can get those questions answered for you. I'll start with a little background on how we have arrived at this point. In 2013, Governor Quinn signed legislation creating the state's medical cannabis program. At the time, it was a pilot program, and there was a licensing process that allowed for medical cannabis dispensaries to sell cannabis to individuals that had prescribed medical conditions. In 2015, those dispensaries began to sell medical cannabis in the state of Illinois. In 2019, Illinois legislature passed the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. That allows for recreational adult use cannabis to now be sold legally in the state of Illinois beginning January 1st of 2020. Governor Pritzker took one step further and signed the act which allows for the medical program to be a permanent program. It was a pilot program initially. It operated well. There was an expansion of that program to allow for additional medical conditions, and ultimately Governor Pritzker has now made that a permanent program to complement the recreational adult use cannabis sales that will take place on January 1st. In 2020, the state of Illinois will issue additional licenses for dispensaries that would participate in the sale of adult use recreational cannabis. Those dispensaries will be located throughout the state of Illinois. We will have some here in the city of Chicago, and they will be allowed to begin, as I stated, on January 1st of 2020. Currently, we have 11 medical dispensaries that are located within the city limits of Chicago. Those medical dispensaries, as I stated, have started as early as 2015. Some have come after that initial wave of applications came through, but there are currently 11 that have been operating, and they provide, again, medical cannabis to those qualified individuals that possess a state medical cannabis card. On January 1st of 2020, the 11 existing medical dispensaries will be allowed to immediately begin to sell recreational adult use cannabis in their same location. So they'll still be in the same locations that they've been in selling medical cannabis, but now they'll have the ability to sell adult use recreational cannabis. Chicago will require that prior to the sales of recreational cannabis, that those dispensaries provide a written notice to the property owners immediately around that location. We believe that the neighbors need to understand that there will be a change in the activity that's taking place in those locations. It's still regulated by the state. All of the same controls are in place, but by virtue of the fact that they'll be selling recreational cannabis, we thought it was important that those neighbors understand that that change will take place on January 1st. And as I indicated, on January 1st, those will be the only locations at that moment that will be open in the city of Chicago to sell medical cannabis. Recreational cannabis. The state of Illinois has complete licensing authority. So all of the licenses to sell cannabis in the state of Illinois are regulated by the state of Illinois. There are several departments that are involved. We did pass out a frequently asked question sheet, and on the back of that sheet are a number of contact information for a number of state and city agencies, and it also gives a brief description of the responsibility of those departments and agencies. But the state has complete authority over the licensing. The city of Chicago really only has the ability to determine the manner, time, place, and the number of dispensaries that we would allow in the city. So once the state licenses those facilities, the city is establishing rules such as the zoning ordinance that we're discussing this evening, which will determine where those locations are throughout the city. There's also a provision in the State Act which allows what we call an opt-out clause. Individual precincts within the city of Chicago can have a petition process where if 25% of the registered voters in that precinct signed a petition to restrict cannabis sales in that precinct, that petition can then be forwarded to the alderman through the city clerk's office, and the city clerk will then, with the alderman, prepare an ordinance that will be introduced in city council, and then that particular precinct will no longer be allowed to have any cannabis sales within the boundaries of that precinct. And lastly, the city does have the ability, and we'll talk a little more about this, the city has the ability to license for the additional types of businesses that may come online for consumption. There are various ways to consume cannabis, as many people may know, smoking, vaping, there are oils and lotions and other things, edibles. There are all sorts of different ways to consume cannabis, but in order for any particular business to allow consumption in their location, they'll have to come through the city process in order to get a license to do so. I just want to give you a little background on the guiding principles around how we're developing the policies here in the city of Chicago. As part of the State Act, there is a strong component that relates to social equity. Social equity is really defined those individuals that have been adversely impacted by the enforcement of drug enforcement policies over the years, the so-called war on drugs. And we know that some communities throughout the state of Illinois have been more adversely impacted because of over-policing and those tactics that were used. And so the state has attempted through this act to try and reverse some of that. Now that the decision has been made to legalize cannabis, those individuals that have been arrested or convicted of small cannabis possession charges in the past will have the ability to have those convictions and arrests expunged, which means it'll clear it off of their record. And we also want to ensure that the provisions that the state allowed for those individuals to now work and own businesses in the cannabis industry, we want to make certain that our policies are assisting those companies and those individuals to the greatest extent possible. We also have a strong desire for community engagement, as we're doing this evening. We want to make certain that as we roll out this new industry in Chicago, which none of us have ever experienced, and we really want to make certain that we're doing it in a responsible way. So in each step, as we develop policies such as the zoning ordinance, we'll continue to come out and have different community engagement sessions such as this, so you can hear directly from the policymakers that are in the room and have an opportunity to ask questions and have those answered. And then finally, we want to be innovative in the way that we introduce the cannabis industry here in the city of Chicago. We have world-class medical and research facilities here in the city, and we want to ensure that medical research on cannabis and the benefits of cannabis are widely distributed and that Chicago can become a leader in this industry. We also want to make certain that people consume it in a responsible way and the most healthy way possible. So we'll have a strong campaign, an anti-smoking campaign, because if you're going to consume cannabis, smoking it defeats the purpose of the benefit, the medical benefit that you can derive from the consumption of cannabis. So those are our driving principles behind all of the policies that you'll hear the city develop over the coming weeks and months. So our cannabis focus areas go beyond just zoning. As you know, we're here to talk about the zoning ordinance, which is really the rules of the road on where and how many dispensaries and other cannabis businesses will allow in the city. But there are a number of other focus areas that the city will be developing over the coming months, from our law enforcement policies to ensure that the Chicago Police Department is trained accurately and adequately on the changes to the law, so that we don't move back to a system where certain communities are being over-policed as a result of small cannabis possession issues. We also want to make certain that we have vocational training for individuals that want to come into this industry through our city colleges, Chicago State, and other universities and educational institutions. We want to make certain that we're developing programs so that those individuals can learn about this industry and have an opportunity to participate. Also, as I mentioned earlier, we have a strong focus on workforce development to ensure that those individuals can come into the business and the industry. And we also want to make certain that we're working with small businesses that want to participate and ensure that they have funding opportunities, technical assistance, even with their licensing process. But beyond licensing, we want to ensure that those businesses are successful, and we'll be working closely with them in the coming months. There's also a public education campaign, information campaign, and so we're attempting to develop a comprehensive program that will bring this industry in the Chicago area in a responsible way. And again, we appreciate your participation tonight as we begin this process. As we continue to say, tonight our focus is on zoning. So we want to give an overview of the cannabis zoning ordinance that was introduced at the September City Council meeting, but we also want to give a little background on the Chicago Zoning Code and what that means, our Zoning Board of Appeals, which is a body that will consider the applications to establish cannabis locations here in the city, the cannabis zoning districts that we set up, and an explanation as to how we develop these cannabis zoning districts and the rationale behind that, as well as the distance requirement that we put from sensitive uses. We wanted to ensure that we protect our vulnerable residents here in the city. And then we'll finally end with the special use process, which is the process that the Zoning Board of Appeals will go through in order to authorize the businesses to locate in the city. So starting with our city zoning code and the municipal code, which entails the zoning regulations, Again, we have our zoning administrator here from the city of Chicago, Patrick Murphy. He and Chairman Tunney and myself will be here to answer questions at the end of the presentation. But the zoning administrator works on developing rules and ensuring compliance with the zoning regulations that have been developed here in the city of Chicago. The zoning code is responsible, as you see, for promoting public health, safety, general welfare, while at the same time preserving the overall quality of life for residents and visitors to the city. So we have a strict zoning code. You see a lot of cities in different areas of the country where there are different heights of buildings and different materials. We have a strict zoning code that protects the integrity of the Chicago neighborhoods. We're a city of neighborhoods, and we're very proud of our neighborhoods, and we want to make certain that we're not bringing in businesses or buildings that detract from the character of our individual neighborhoods. And so that's the purpose of the zoning code. We also want to make certain that we're maintaining vibrant and economically vital commercial corridors so that we have economic development throughout the city, and we're working to increase that in various areas of the city. And then finally, we want to ensure that we're preserving orderly and compatible land use and development patterns. So making certain that similar types of businesses are in certain areas, that certain businesses aren't allowed in specifically residential neighborhoods. That's why we don't have businesses in the middle of a residential street in most instances. And so that's the overall general purpose for the Chicago zoning code. The Zoning Board of Appeals, as I indicated, they have the authority to decide all matters that the city's zoning code indicates would go to the Zoning Board of Appeals. The Zoning Board of Appeals is an independent body that has a chairman that's been appointed by the mayor, and again, they will consider special uses and variations to the city's zoning code that are outside of the normal business development or residential development that we see in the city. Adult special uses are a specific category that the ZBA or the Zoning Board of Appeals considers authorizing those businesses to come into the city, and cannabis-related businesses will fall under that adult special use. And so all of our cannabis businesses will have to go through the ZBA process in order to be located in the city. And then finally, the ZBA does hear appeals on decisions that the zoning administrator makes in his capacity. If there's an appeal to his decision or the zoning administrator's decision, then it comes before the Zoning Board of Appeals. Now, we've had some discussion in the past about our cannabis zones and how we develop those zones. So we want to give a brief explanation on exactly what we attempted to do here. We developed 7 zones throughout the city, which we're calling cannabis districts. The overall purpose of the cannabis district is to make certain that we have an even distribution of cannabis dispensaries throughout the city. We don't want a cluster of cannabis dispensaries in one area and then not have dispensaries in other areas of the city. As you saw with the medical dispensaries that are located in the city, most of them are on the north side of the city. But there are individuals who have medical conditions throughout the city, and it's unfair that they would have to travel all the way to the north side of the city. So we wanted to make certain that we forced the even distribution of businesses throughout the city. And one way that we decided that we'd be able to do so is to create the 7 districts. In addition to the districts, we put a cap on the total number of dispensaries that can go inside of each district. As of January 1st, we will establish a maximum of 7 dispensaries in each of the 7 districts for a total of 49. So that will again allow for an even distribution throughout the city. As I stated, there are currently 4 medical cannabis dispensaries in the North District of the city, and that will allow for them to have an additional 3 for the total of 7. So they don't get an additional 7 in addition to the ones that they already have. The maximum amount that will be allowed as of January 1st will be 7 in each of the districts. On May 1st, when the state authorizes additional licenses, the commissioner of the Department of Planning and Development We'll make an assessment at that time as to whether or not we will increase the cap and allow additional businesses to situate inside of the city of Chicago. When the state issues a license, it's not specifically for the city of Chicago, it's for the surrounding suburban areas as well. And so even if they receive a state license, they will be able to open a dispensary at some location. We would like for them to be in Chicago, but we also want to make certain that this is being done in a responsible way. So we're going to take a look at it in every stage as the state allows for additional licenses. We did determine that we wanted to put in one exclusion zone in the city. We have a wonderful lakefront and a tremendous downtown thriving business area. We want to protect against the sensitive security issues that come with the congestion, the traffic patterns, the commercial corridors, the entertainment and tourism districts within the downtown area. Now, this doesn't mean that we've excluded the entire downtown. There's just a certain portion of the central business district in downtown where we will not allow cannabis businesses to be established at this point. Again, this business is new. We don't necessarily know all of the impacts, and we want to watch those closely. Over a period of time, there will be evaluations, as I indicated, on May 1st, and then in 2021, the state will do a broad evaluation of how the program is operating. At that time, there may be some adjustments, but currently, this is the exclusion area that has been developed. Just for a point of reference, on the north end is Oak Street. South would be Ida B. Wells, which was formerly Congress Parkway. The eastern boundary, obviously, is Lake Michigan. And south of the main branch of the river, the western boundary is the south branch of the Chicago River. And north of the river, it is LaSalle Street. So that is an exclusion area. The central business district expands beyond this area, both north and south and west. But this is a specific area that the administration thought would be important to make certain that we knew how the industry was going to develop before we just allowed the businesses to be in that particular area of the city. Sensitive uses have been determined that we want to ensure that any cannabis business that's a dispensary that sells adult or medical cannabis would be situated at least 500 feet from any existing school. That's public or private or parochial schools as well. And the 500 feet would apply to any dispensary that would like to locate in the city. They would have to be a minimum of 500 feet from the sensitive use. Kindergarten through 12th grade is the definition of a school in the Chicago zoning code. So those are the schools that we're referencing when we make that statement. Now, special use is the process that the cannabis dispensaries will have to go through before the Zoning Board of Appeals in order to be authorized to open a dispensary in the city of Chicago. So all new dispensaries, as I indicated, would have to go through the ZBA special use process. There is a required community engagement, as we said at the top of the presentation. We believe that if any business is coming into your community and the residents of the community should have an opportunity, just as we are doing in this forum, to come and meet with the owners, the operators of that business, to be able to ask them questions about how the business is going to operate, and to be able to hear directly from the community in which they want to come into about the concerns that the community may have, make certain that they have an opportunity to meet the residents who may want to have employment opportunities at that location. And this is the first introduction, hopefully not the last introduction, but we're ensuring that these cannabis operators come to the community. They will have to provide a notice to the local alderman so that the alderman is aware. They'll have to make public notice in the local newspaper, and they will also have to mail out a written notice to the property owners in the immediate vicinity of the location that they want to establish the business in. So this is basically a broad overview of the ordinance and all the elements in the ordinance. And as the chairman said, we hope to go before the zoning committee on Tuesday the 15th, and we hope that the zoning ordinance will pass through the full city council on Wednesday the 16th, and that will give the operators kind of the rules of the road on where and how they can come into the city, and it also informs the residents of the requirements that the operators have to follow through in order to establish themselves in the city. So we appreciate your time this evening. We look forward to answering your questions.
Is Juan Carlos back?
I forgot to speak about the lottery. I'm sorry. So there are other elements. I apologize. So as part of the ZBA special use process, as I indicated, to require community engagement, which is where my mind is focused, the ZBA will also require full disclosure of the ownership of that particular business. We want to make certain that we know the business owners that are coming into the communities operating these businesses, and we want to make certain that we have an opportunity for the community to know that information as well. And we also want to know what they put in their state application so that we also know the promises or commitments that they made to the state, especially as it relates to social equity. We want to know how the state scored them, what the criteria was, so that we also have the opportunity to ensure that they follow through on the commitments that they made. And then lastly, as we establish the districts and the caps in each of these districts, we want to ensure that it's a transparent process. So we don't want someone to say that someone was able to put their application in early or get an early spot in line or any of those sorts of things that people may think. So we're going to create a lottery process. The Zoning Board of Appeals chairman would actually create a lottery process. It will be authorized after the zoning ordinance is approved through City Council. That lottery process is how the dispensary operators will choose the districts that they will be able to put their business in. And so we felt as though that was a transparent way. It'll take place in City Hall. There'll probably be some sort of live feed as we're doing this meeting this evening so that people can watch it in real time and everybody will know as the dispensary operators get their lottery position, they will have an opportunity at that point to make a decision of what district they want to go in. Those rules have not been developed yet, else we would be sharing them with you, but procedurally we have to wait until the zoning ordinance passes through City Council, which then authorizes the ZBA to create that process. So we look forward to getting that information and making certain that we share with the communities as well. So thanks again. We look forward to answering your questions.
Yes, okay, there we go, thank you. So we are ready for questions. Before we do so, I'm gonna go back to the previous slide just one more time, the rules of engagement. Again, and we have some children in the audience, so we appreciate everyone being respectful, being timely with your 1 minute, and being courageous with your question. So with that, if we can show a show of hands of who either has a question now or who thinks they will have a question. All right, so it's quite a few of you, great. So we have Mr. Vance Henry, who's to my right, who has a microphone, who will be floating around on the right side. We have Mr. Manny Whitfield, who's on my left side, who will be floating around. And then we're gonna ask Vance Henry to start it off in terms of identifying someone who has a question. We'll start the clock, and then we'll have the panel answer, so please.
Juan Carlos?
Yes.
Juan Carlos, excuse me 1 second. I want to use a point of personal privilege. I wanted to introduce and ask to stand. We have two of my colleagues here from the Zoning Committee, Alderman Ray Lopez from the 15th Ward, and Alderman David Moore. I know you came in, and I hope, yes. So they're on the Zoning Committee, and they're all ears. They have a lot to say usually, but tonight we're going to get all ears and see what our community responses are going to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alderman. In fact, on that point, are there any other elected officials that are in the audience today? No. Thank you for that, Alderman. Appreciate it. So please, Vance, please.
Thank you for the opportunity. My question is, I'm one of those people y'all talked about that was affected by it, got a record. I'm considered to be a felony. So can you talk more or go a little bit more into detail the opportunities that a person like me will have in this industry?
And can you state your name, please, sir?
Jonathan.
Thank you.
Sure, I'm going to stand because I can't see everyone from the back. I appreciate the question. As we indicated, we're really focusing on zoning, but this is such an important issue so that people understand how and if they have the ability to participate. So based on the state law that was enacted in June, individuals that have a cannabis-related conviction or arrest would have the ability to have that expunged based on the low-level cannabis arrest that they had. And so it's lined out in the state act, but again, on the FAQ sheet that we passed out, if you turn that over on the back, there are contact information for the state of Illinois. The city of Chicago doesn't make that determination, but we have been working with State's Attorney Kim Fox, whose office will be administering the expungement process here in Chicago for individuals that have had that situation.
Sir, that's your minute. I'm sorry. Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.
We'll talk afterwards, but let's just.
Paul will be available afterwards, too, to have a conversation. Thank you. Manny?
Yeah, Mom, it's a two-part question. One, if you are a convicted felon, are you able to apply for a dispensary license? And two, I see the zoning is for the city, but does that apply for the south suburbs and west suburbs? Like, how is the zoning going for that?
So the zoning that we're talking about is only within the city of Chicago. So this is the city zoning administrator, and this ordinance is being passed through the Chicago City Council. So each municipality throughout Cook County and the other areas of the state will determine their own zoning regulations and how and where they will allow the businesses to come in. Some communities have just opted out totally as an entire city. We've decided to move forward given the opt-out provision that we discussed, but this is only concerning the city of Chicago. As it relates to the question about felony ownership, I don't believe that that's possible, but I don't want to speak to the state's rules. And so again, if you would contact the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulation, which is on that sheet, they can give you the exact specifics on your qualifications to apply for a license.
Thank you for your question. Vance?
Good evening. My name is Claudette Reddick, and my question is, on January 1st, when those medical dispensaries are able to do recreational, will anybody else outside of that group be ready? Or is this process you're talking about going to take a bit longer?
The process will take a bit longer. Thanks for that question. The medical dispensaries have already gone through our special use process. They're already licensed by the state of Illinois. They've already been selling the product. It's the same product. The medical product that they're selling will be the same product that you're selling to recreational users. And so there's no change in the actual activity other than an expanded customer base. So you won't need a medical card exclusively to go in and purchase. So those will be the only 11 on day one, because the additional locations won't be online yet because they'll still be going through the process of zoning at that point.
Thank you. Manny?
Good evening. My name is Lamont Williams. I have a question. If you can go back to the slide with the 7 districts. Will the 7 districts take into account the disproportionately impacted areas as defined in the legislation?
So again, this is a zoning specific ordinance that's being put forth. We did develop the districts, but we only can take into account land use considerations because it's zoning. We do intend, when we get to consumption licensing and other aspects, to heavily ensure that social equity is a component of that consideration, but legally by the municipal code and other precedent, we can only take into account land use consideration, which is why the land use here is to ensure that we're not overly saturating any one particular part of the city and that they're spread out throughout the city.
Thank you for your question. Vance?
Yeah, how you doing, Paul? My name is Wallace Gator Bradley. I have a question. The fact that the guys that had the medical before anyone else, when I read in the paper, you have one person from Chicago that end up being able to do 7 things downstate. How do you make sure or make it possible and right for individuals, like that young man was saying, would have a chance within the district that y'all have laid out, when one individual can pretty much monopolize the whole situation?
I appreciate that, Gator. Thank you. I don't see it as one individual being able to monopolize. Every individual company that's operating today, they already have a license. Some companies have multiple licenses. What they will be able to do is take that one license and then select for one additional location based on the number of licenses that they already have. In May of 2020, the state will issue additional licenses up to an additional 47 that will be permitted to potentially come into the city of Chicago if the determination is made that we raise the caps at that time. But to your point of one individual will not be able to come in and occupy all of the available locations throughout the city.
Thank you. Manny?
Hi, my name is Cherie. My question, I have a two-part question. First of all, once you fill out for the state license and or obtain a state license, is that guaranteed that the zoning board would approve you, or that's two separate?
That's two separate situations. So individuals that already have a license, the medical dispensaries, they can go through our process because they already have a license.
But when you first start the license process?
Sure. So the license process for the applicants that will be awarded licenses in May of 2020, you don't have to, you can apply to the state and they would approve you with a conditional license based on the fact that we've already established the zoning rules and it would be permitted for you to locate in the city of Chicago. They'll give you a conditional license, and then once you have that license, you can start through our zoning process.
But there's no guarantee that I will make it through the zoning process.
There is no guarantee.
So I can pay for the license, but there's no guarantee.
Let me say this. We do have the ability, and the zoning administrator can speak to this. There's a such thing called an opinion letter. So you can request an opinion letter from the zoning department to say, this is the location that I want to go in. Can you let me know, is there anything in this area, be it the zoning, a school, another dispensary, is there anything that would invalidate my ability to be approved? The zoning letter will be your initial indication as to whether or not your application would be approved for a special use. But beyond that, you would still have to go through the process. There may be something in your application that you didn't complete, your disclosure may not be there, so we can't say that it's guaranteed. But at that point, you already understand that you're allowed, that there's an opportunity for the dispensary to go there if you complete the process and go through the ZBA.
I can get
Thank
that
you,
zoning
ma'am.
letter first
Ma'am.
and then fill out.
Ma'am, your minute is over. Thank you. Vance?
Josh Alper, Harvest 360. My question is about the medical program. You mentioned that the governor had signed the medical program into permanent status. I'm wondering, will the additional 75 adult use facilities and other facilities also be allowed to apply to provide medicine for patients? Or will that only be limited to the original group? And the follow-up on that is, you know, you talk about research and things like the other collaborations in medical. I'm just wondering if there's any program for, you know, expanding the medical to have it be differentiated from the adult use.
Sure. Thanks for that question. Again, we're going to focus on zoning, but I will allow that the state will allow for additional medical licenses at some point. There'll be a licensing process. And all of the cultivation centers, craft growers, they are growing cannabis to go into the dispensaries, and it's the same product as a medical user would have. So they are all supplying medical cannabis, if you would, but it's also for sale recreationally as well.
Thank you. Manny?
It'll just go through the process, and they'll all be in the same situation.
Sir?
Yes, my name is George Blakemore, and it's unacceptable you passing the buck to the state. You have state senators, state legislature, and you have Cullerton, it's from the state. Mannequin, and you got lobbyists. Don't go there passing the buck to the state. Black people need economic development. This is an opportunity for you to give us our reparation, okay? And we're entitled to this. So we want to get these licensed. So it's already rigged that those whites or whoever already got them, they can even get an additional one. So you playing a game here. You playing nothing but a game. So I don't want to hear about to say the state do not obey the immigration and naturalization law. The state.
Sir, thank you. That's your time. That's your time.
Don't try to hoodwink black people. We want all of these.
Sir, I don't think there's a question in there. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Blakemore.
Paul, feel free to answer.
We do appreciate your enthusiastic advocating on behalf of the community, right? So we agree that we want to ensure that as many community residents in our impacted areas have the opportunity to come into the business. But we want to make certain that we're not giving out misinformation. This is a state license program, which the city of Chicago is developing a framework to ensure that we can responsibly bring the dispensaries in, and we fully support local residents, and especially those that have qualified under social equity, to participate, and we'll be providing assistance, and we'll talk about that in future meetings. But we appreciate that comment, and we agree with that comment in its accurate form, which is the state of Illinois is the licensing authority, and the city of Chicago is developing the zoning around that.
Thank you, Paul. And then we have another speaker.
How you doing? Curtis is my name. Quick question. One more clarification. Number one, on that petition process, is that before or after someone is awarded in a district, quote unquote, a property, someone can come in and change the petition and kick them out? Clarification on that. Number two, is the process, how long is that process you guys speaking on that ZBA approval process? I wanted to find out a little bit more on that because the state only gives you 180 days to figure out where your property is going to be. And then I want to talk a little bit more about those fees that you guys, it hasn't been discussed there, but there was something leaked out in the paper a little bit before then as far as the state's going to be charging up to 60 grand or something like that for a dispensary, but then the city's coming in with another 5 somewhere in between there, and I'll end there. Thanks.
Let me speak to the last part, and then you can speak to
The first part.
yes. So the information that was in the paper was inaccurate only because there was an additional ordinance, not Mayor Lightfoot's ordinance, that was introduced at the September City Council meeting. That local alderman said that was accidentally introduced, and so that ordinance is not moving forward. We will be speaking to licensing for consumption, and there will be a fee just as any other business license. We don't anticipate right now having large fee structure around that. There's already a large fee to come into the business, but if you're not a licensed state business and you want to have an additional cafe or cigar shop or whatever it might be, there will be a licensing structure. We're in the process of developing that now, but that was inaccurate information as of today because that's not moving forward at this point.
On the first issue about the petitioning process, we believe that it's very similar to the Airbnb petition process, and I believe there are certain aldermen that have worked with their community that may or may not want this in their precincts. And as was said, 25% of the registered voters would petition an exclusion in this precinct of the sale of recreational / medical, because they're all really the same thing at this point after January 1st. So I would engage your community groups to work with their aldermen. It would go through the city clerk process, as Paul said, but then with that evidence, the alderman could introduce an ordinance precinct by precinct, literally to ban the sale of these things in certain precincts. And precincts generally are about 600-700 registered voters, so it's not like, I know around the Airbnb with Alderman Quinn, he's introduced 10 or so of these precinct by precinct for exclusion of Airbnb around his neighborhood and around Midway Airport. We believe the process is very similar, so time is of the essence, I would say. If this is something that's strongly in opposition, I would start community organizing on this as soon as possible.
Thank you. Manny?
Good evening. My name is Rodney Howell. I hate to sound naive. I heard about in the precinct, the 25% ratio, but since this is about zoning, quite naturally you have places that's zoned for residential. So I've become an advocate to make sure that residential stay residential, and would like to know how does this jeopardize residential zoning as a business where it comes and completely negate residential zoning?
Thank you. No, these regulations would not allow for the establishment of any of these dispensaries in a residentially zoned district. All of the R districts would be excluded from any of the dispensary operations.
Vance?
Hello, my name is Aaron Walker. My question is, we were talking about zoning, residential zoning. Mixed use, I have a building that's businesses at the one level, apartments on top. Is that considered, off limits for the zoning?
No, if the zoning for the property is not an R district, then the dispensary could be established on the ground floor or in another commercial area of a building that otherwise has residential units above.
Thank you for your question. Manny? I'm sorry, sir. We're over here first. Sorry.
How you doing? My name is Jude. My question isn't necessarily about the zoning, but where would I find information as far as getting the state licenses for opening a dispensary and possibly cultivation?
Sure. So again, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulations will license for dispensaries. The Illinois Department of Agriculture is the department that will oversee the cultivation and craft growing, which anyone that's growing cannabis. And so again, if you picked up the FAQ sheet as you came in, that information is on the back of that, the contact information for those departments.
Thank you. Sir?
Hey, how you doing? My name is Ismael Correa Ramirez, and I am a financial representative. My question more aligns with what the banking regulation might come down to, and if with that banking regulation there is opportunity to then take it from a state-run enterprise to a enterprise where money is being put within the banking structure and then is dispersed out from the banking structure at the expense of each individual dispensary to bring community standards and quality of life. Is that a possibility?
I appreciate that you're bringing that subject up. We would need you to pose that question to the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional Regulations. We don't really have the ability to speak to that because we don't regulate in that area. There are some concerns about banking and how businesses would bank, but we really don't have that information, but that contact information is on the back of the sheet.
One moment. Do you have a further answer, Paul? No? Okay. Before we go forward, just one moment, please. We are running on the allotted time, but to be consistent with yesterday, we actually did go 15 minutes more. So show of hands of who still has questions. It's quite a few. Okay. So we do have to cut it at some point, and we only have the room for a bit more, but I need to get permission from our ASL interpreters. Are you okay for another 15 minutes? And then from our panel, are you okay for another 15 minutes? Okay. So we're going to do another 15. We'll get to as many of your questions as possible. I believe we were on Manny's side. Please.
My name is Queen Sister. I represent Village Cannabis Culture. and you can talk to me about CBD dispensary opportunities. I'm more or less where everybody else is. I haven't heard you mention anything about R3, although this is about zoning. We speak as if Nguzo Chapman and the drug cartel wasn't real. We've already been victimized by a process. I want to know what it is that you're really going to do to level the playing fields in the areas that has been victimized by the territorial warfare. You know, the Latinos already got to step up. They were the distributors, and our guys in the streets were used as the dealers. What mechanism is going to be put in place to level the playing field and to plug this flood of black blood that's flowing through the urban streets of what the nation has come to know as Chirac, Illinois?
Thank you, Queen Sister, for that. So the residential component that you just spoke of, R3, that is part of the residential zoning ordinance. And so we will not allow cannabis dispensaries in the residential neighborhoods as we... Oh, the R...
Ma'am, your time, if Mr. Stewart can answer your question. Ma'am.
Understood. And again, we're speaking on zoning, but I will speak to that. So the state act does have, in the category of social equity, there are specific programs. There's a cannabis development fund that is being developed. I think it has $12 million in it today. It's going to be increased as the applications come in and they pay their fees. So all of those funds, I understand. I appreciate that. And we want to make certain that we get this information out. So as we talk about social equity moving forward, we hope that you will continue to come out so that we can address those in a greater level of detail. We want to stick to the issue for tonight.
Thank you. And we're going to go to Van Site before we do. Just a reminder, because people come from a long way to be on the microphone. So respect and timeliness, please, in your comments. Ma'am?
Mama E. Maybe people in the room don't know, but the medical dispensaries as of October 1st already got their application for edibles. The state requirements that social programs about equity in our community, what I want to know is how is the city of Chicago zoning going to ensure that it goes to the indigenous residents, since they have been forced out of generational homes in communities like Inglewood and Lawndale and Roseland? How are you going to ensure that those young people who were forced out of their homes and no longer are in Inglewood but are entitled to those grants get them?
Thank you for asking that question. We do want to make certain that people understand the city of Chicago will participate in ensuring, through the various programs that we have, the access to funding to make certain that businesses that need development assistance will be provided that assistance. We want to develop that full program and then come out prepared to speak to all of those concerns, and we will. We're in the process of developing that program. Until we get the zoning in place, the zoning really won't address that, because it's where the location. Well, I appreciate your assistance, and we'll look forward to the call.
And so we're going to go to Manny Side. Before we do,
I want to say quickly, though, if you were listening, the zoning is about location. Just because, as the applicant over here, I get my paperwork in, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm automatically going in there. There's a zoning board of appeals process, too, that I believe will have a very rigorous requirement of social equity in that portion of it. So it's more than a two-step process, but I believe the zoning is about the location. Doesn't necessarily mean that the social equity piece isn't part of the zoning board of appeals, just so you know. Okay.
Thank you. And I do want to mention, I hear some folks straining to hear in the back, so if you can respect the speakers, please. Ma'am? Yes, please.
My name is Loretta Hawkins. I'm aware that cannabis is medically beneficial. However, one of your bullet points was public health education. And I would like to know what method will you use to distribute information about the effects of cannabis in terms of addictions, side effects, and long-term medical effects?
Thank you for that question. We will develop a public health and public information campaign. Chicago Department of Public Health has been studying this issue. They're developing a program so that we have information that's provided both in the dispensaries, through the aldermanic offices, on the city's website, and broadly throughout the city to talk about both the health benefits and the concerns that people need to be aware of. We want to talk about impaired driving. We want to make certain that individuals aren't driving under the influence of cannabis. And we want to make certain that all of that information gets out. So the Chicago Department of Public Health is currently working on that. And in the coming weeks, we'll have meetings that will discuss that. We may combine some topics based on the feedback and what we're hearing today so that we can answer as many questions in one setting as possible and not to have a meeting for each particular subject. So we'll definitely be speaking to that because that's an important aspect of it.
Thank you. And once again, we do have some folks in the back who can't hear, so if we can respect the next speaker, we really appreciate it, ma'am.
In Quandra Spades, I have a question regarding the lottery process that you presented earlier. I've heard that social equity applicants is definitely going to be a piece, an important piece of the zoning piece. And so what if a social equity applicant wants to open up a dispensary, if they have the means and they've already applied and they've got a license or ability to get a license to open up a dispensary in their community to make sure that that economic development is going to flow through their community. But it sounds like they're going to have to go through a lottery process. So how can you give me some clarity around that?
Sure. Now, again, we've heard this question before. I appreciate you bringing it up again this evening. The lottery process is designed so that we have a fair way for individuals to come into any of the particular districts. Now, I did hear a situation last evening. If I own a business or if I own an existing building in my neighborhood, I think it's going to be a great opportunity to develop a dispensary, and I want to go through the state process, but I don't get a lottery position in the district. I think that's the question you're asking. When we develop these rules, while we can empathize with that particular situation, it's difficult to develop a rule that's tailored to each individual circumstance. We have to apply a rule across the entire city. So just as any individual may want to open up a dispensary in one of the north districts, they'll be limited because they already have 4 in that area. They may be in the same circumstance. So that is a situation that could happen at any point, at any place in the city. But as we continue to look at establishing evaluation points to determine if we raise the caps, then additional opportunities will come online. We're trying to figure out a way to tie it closely to the number of licenses, but it would be really difficult to tie it to everybody that wants to be in this district would be allowed to do so, because there may be 100 people that want to move through the process, but it would be irresponsible for us to grant 100 special use designations when we are only going to allow 7. So it's an unintended consequence, if you would, and I'll acknowledge that. But at the end of the day, when we develop the program, it has to be even across the entire city, which is the balancing act that we're trying to achieve.
Thank you for your question. Manny?
Hi, my name is Darren McCasker. I have a quick question. It's more code and zoning. When you say that the zoning will be apportioned by the lottery, et cetera, are there going to be any restrictions as far as height of the building, the floor space, et cetera? I know that's more of a code question, but there could be other areas of the city where someone has the financial ability to have a magnificent place versus someone else on, let's say, this side of the city who may not have those funds. So is there going to be anything I know it's business is just business, but are there going to be any codes or zones that sort of equalize this until everyone gets a level shot on the playing field here?
So from a strict zoning code standpoint, the regulations that apply to any retail business, from a building size, parking requirements, any other requirements that come through the Department of Buildings for your actual build out would all hold the same for any of the dispensaries or any of the other cannabis operations. The state will have additional regulations that relate to how the space has to be laid out, security plans, things of that nature. But from a code application standpoint, the city will treat it just the same as it treats any other type of retail use, which varies depending on the zoning district that the property's in.
Thank you for your question, sir. Vance?
Hi, my name is Kiara Harder, and my question pertains to schools. I saw on here that you guys said that it can't be within 500 feet up from a school. As you are aware, within the South Side, like we had a lot of school closing. So are we speaking of active schools, or are we just speaking of like school buildings?
We're talking about established schools that are open at the time, and so any existing school, a dispensary would be precluded from locating within 500 feet of an existing school.
Thank you for your question. Manny, side? Sir? Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Tora. So I just have a question as far as the zoning. So say, for instance, I'm a social equity applicant, and I get my license, my conditional license. They give you 180 days to find a place. How long is the actual zoning process? Like, how long would that process be? Would it be a month, 2 months, or are you guys still working on that, trying to figure that out?
So the Zoning Board of Appeals hearing process is a monthly hearing. The timing to move through that will depend on the lottery rules that are established and the amount of applicants that there are at any given time, depending on the different waves that the state rolls out licensing ability. So we will be very mindful of the time constraints that people are under from an application standpoint, but we can't give you a definitive answer on the dates until we have a lottery process, which we cannot have until we have an ordinance. And then that would be dependent on, from the lottery standpoint, on how many applicants there are at any given period of time.
Let me also add to that. We understand that there is a lot of interest in establishing dispensaries and other cannabis businesses. So we may ask the Zoning Board of Appeals to add an additional meeting. We'll be constrained by budget constraints and things of that nature, but we're considering whether or not the Zoning Board of Appeals may add an additional meeting to accommodate the volume of licenses and requests that come through.
Thank you, ma'am. Vance?
Good evening. I'm Edie. I'm the Executive Director of Chicago NORML, which is the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. And I hear a lot of questions about the state process. And so you can follow us. I've got cards in the back for that. But I do have a question. Good evening, Paul. We're working with the state in the veto session to hope that craft grows would be able to stack licenses or be in more than one grow in one building. And the reason that we want to do that is because there are a lot of buildings that are underused and a lot of vacant land that can be used for multiple grows. And I'm wondering if we, while we're doing that, we'd like to be able to keep the city's zoning in mind. Would that be a special zone or a special license for the city?
So from the craft grower standpoint, in any of the other production operations, depending on where you're zoned at, there may be, there are districts in the manufacturing areas that would allow it by right, and you wouldn't have the special use requirements. But as far as the multiple craft growers on one single property, we are bound by what the state approves. So if they don't make that relaxation, then we could not allow that moving forward regardless of the zoning.
Thank you.
We would be bound by allowing whatever the state allows through their act.
Thank you for your question. Manny, we only have time for a few more questions, but we'll do a summary wrap-up so all of your questions can be answered either through the email or for folks who stay behind. Sir?
Okay, yes, my name is Jermon Hull. I have a quick question right quick. So this young lady was worried about possibly how it will affect our neighborhoods with individuals that are out there, which ways the dispensaries will be able to grow within like the far south side or like southeast side and things of that nature. Is there other avenues to help out possible young men that are already out doing it? That way they do not at all bother anyone with the dispensary and things. They're like direct marketing firms that can be able to be established. With direct marketing, we know it is face-to-face sales. And if they go under a direct marketing balance, then basically these individual young men would be able to sell on the street with a license and things of that nature for subsidies, say at the dispensaries and things of that nature. So are you guys looking to possibly open it up for direct marketing to be allowed in this so they can sell cannabis possibly on the streets to allow these young men possibilities and more growth?
Thank you, sir.
So if I'm understanding your question, you're saying if individuals that are currently selling cannabis, right? So we do want individuals to come into a legal business and utilize the skill set that they've developed, right? But we want it to be done legally. If they are permitted by the state to obtain a license, then we want to support that, right? Clearly, they already understand, and we're not in a position to deny anybody the opportunity as long as they have the qualifications and the licensing through the state. We want to make certain that if the state develops a rule or an opportunity, that the city develops a framework to support that. So we're hearing questions about home delivery and all sorts of different models and things that might happen. Those rules haven't been established by the state yet. When we receive an update of the state act and any additional rules that they develop, then the city will make that determination and build a framework around that. So that is an absolute possibility at some point down the road, but we haven't been given any guidance by the state pertaining to that particular scenario.
So we want to respect the final speaker, and then we'll talk about how we can answer your questions after the session. So if we can respect the final speaker. Vance? Sir.
Hello, everybody. Javon. So I kind of have two questions. One is this zoning only relegated to dispensaries, or does this also include craft grow and other licenses that are available through the state? Then my other question is, and this may not be the platform to ask this, but will there be an opportunity, will there be a minimum of social equity applicants for each zone or each district?
Thank you for that question. So there will not be a specific number of social equity applicants for each zone because we can't determine the land use based on the social equity provision as it's related by the state. So we don't have that ability. And I apologize, I missed the first part. Yeah.
The ordinance that's under consideration by council now and that we're here to talk about contemplates all of the dispensary functions plus all of the multiple growing functions from a cultivation center, the craft growers, infusers, and processors. So it does contemplate all of the options that the state has left available to the municipalities.
So we have gone over times. I do want to thank Kennedy King College for hosting us, our ASL interpreters for joining us today, our panelists, and each one of you for coming out and being courageous with your questions.